She didn't ask for money. She didn't beg. All the old woman asked for was leftover food. What she received instead was laughter, insults, and humiliation. But none of them knew who was watching, and none of them were ready for what would happen next. The glass doors of the luxury restaurant slid open with a soft hiss, releasing a wave of warmth and the rich smell of roasted meat, butter, and fresh bread. For a brief moment, the old woman stood frozen at the entrance, as if afraid that even the air inside might reject her. Her clothes were torn and faded, hanging loosely on her thin frame. The sleeves of her coat were frayed, and her shoes, once black, had turned the color of dust and time. Deep lines carved her face, not just by age, but by years of loss, hunger, and silent endurance. Her stomach tightened painfully as the aroma reached her. It had been 2 days since she had eaten anything more than a crust of bread someone had thrown away. Still, she straightened her back before stepping inside. There was something about her posture, quiet, restrained, dignified, that did not match the way she looked. Inside, the restaurant glowed with golden lights. Crystal glasses chimed softly as wealthy customers laughed and talked. Men in tailored suits and women draped in silk sat comfortably, barely noticing the world beyond their plates. The old woman's presence felt like a crack in a polished mirror. A waiter noticed her almost immediately. He frowned. "Hey, you can't be in here," he said sharply, lowering his voice as if her poverty were contagious. The old woman clasped her hands together gently. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm but weak. "I'm sorry to disturb you," she said. "I was only wondering if there might be some leftover food. Anything you were going to throw away." The waiter stared at her, stunned, not by her request, but by the audacity he thought it took to ask such a thing in a place like this. "Leftovers," he repeated loudly, drawing attention. "This isn't a charity kitchen." A few heads turned. Forks paused midair. Whispers began. The old woman felt the heat of embarrassment crawl up her neck, but she didn't look down. Hunger had taught her many things, but it had not taken away her self-respect. "I understand," she said softly. "I won't take much. Just enough, so I don't sleep hungry tonight." A woman at a nearby table let out a short laugh. "Did you hear that?" she said to her companion. "She wants leftovers. In this restaurant." Her friend smirked, eyes scanning the old woman from head to toe. Unbelievable. They let anyone walk in these days. Another man waved his hand dismissively. "This is disgusting," he muttered. "I come here to enjoy my meal, not to be guilt-tripped by beggars." The word beggar landed like a slap. The waiter's face hardened. "You're disturbing our guests," he snapped. "Leave. Now." The old woman swallowed. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of holding herself together. "Please," she said quietly. "I'll stand outside if you want. I just thought." "Enough," the waiter interrupted. "Get out before I call security." Laughter rippled through part of the room. Someone shook their head in disgust. Another customer whispered, "She probably chose this life." The old woman turned slowly toward the door. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the weight of every insult pressed against her back. Just as she reached the exit, a young busboy hurried past carrying a tray. A piece of bread slipped from one of the plates and fell to the floor near her feet. For a brief second, instinct took over. She bent slightly, her eyes fixed on the bread. It was still clean, still edible. Gasps followed. "Did you see that?" a man scoffed. "She's about to eat food off the floor." The waiter rushed forward and kicked the bread away. "Have some shame," he shouted. "This is exactly why people like you aren't welcome here. People like you." The words cut deeper than hunger ever could. The old woman straightened slowly. Her eyes met the waiter's, not with anger, not with tears, but with something far more unsettling. Quiet sadness mixed with unbroken pride. "I do have shame," she said gently. "That's why I asked politely instead of stealing. And that's why I waited to be answered instead of taking what wasn't offered." Her voice carried through the room, and for a moment, the restaurant fell strangely quiet. But silence didn't last. "Security," someone called out. 2 guards approached, already annoyed. One of them grabbed her arm. Not roughly, but without care. "Let's go," he said. As they escorted her toward the door, the old woman did not resist. She didn't cry. She didn't plead anymore. She simply walked, her head held high, as though she were leaving a place she never truly belonged to. Just before she stepped outside, she paused. "I hope," she said softly, not turning around, "that none of you ever learn what hunger teaches the heart." The door closed behind her. Most people went back to their meals within seconds, the incident already fading into background noise. But not everyone. At a table near the corner, partially hidden by a decorative plant, a man had watched everything in silence. He hadn't laughed. He hadn't spoken. His fingers tightened slowly around his glass as his eyes followed the old woman's exit. There was something about her voice, something about the way she stood, something that stirred a memory he hadn't touched in decades. And as he rose slowly from his seat, one thing was certain. What had just happened would not end the way anyone expected. The cold evening air struck the old woman's face as she stepped onto the sidewalk, but it felt no harsher than the looks she had just endured inside. The restaurant door closed behind her with a soft finality, sealing away warmth, light, and human voices. For a moment, she stood still, her thin shoulders rising and falling as she drew a slow breath. Hunger gnawed at her stomach like an unrelenting ache, yet she did not bend over or clutch herself. Years of hardship had taught her how to suffer quietly. She adjusted the worn shawl around her shoulders and began to walk, her steps slow but steady. The city lights blurred slightly in her vision, though she refused to let tears fall. Crying wasted energy, and energy was something she could not afford to lose. Behind the glass walls of the restaurant, life continued as if nothing unusual had happened. Plates were cleared, wine was poured, laughter returned. The waiter who had shouted the loudest shook his head and muttered, "Some people just don't know their place," as he straightened a tablecloth. A few customers nodded in agreement, comforted by the idea that the world still made sense to them, that poverty belonged outside, far away from their carefully arranged lives. But at the corner table, the man who had been watching sat frozen. His name was Jonathan Hale. To the world, he was a powerful businessman, the silent owner behind several successful restaurant chains, including this very one. He rarely revealed his identity, preferring to observe without influence, to understand how his establishments truly treated people when they didn't know who he was. What he had just witnessed left a bitter taste in his mouth, stronger than any expensive wine. He stood up slowly, his chair scraping softly against the floor. His heart was beating faster than it should have, not with anger alone, but with something deeper, something personal. The old woman's face, her voice, the way she spoke about hunger, it had all unlocked a memory he had buried long ago. He walked toward the exit, ignoring the puzzled looks of the staff. Outside, the city hummed with traffic and distant voices. Jonathan scanned the sidewalk and spotted her a few yards away, moving carefully, as if each step required calculation. He hesitated for a second, unsure of how to approach her. Power came easily to him in boardrooms, but this required something else. "Ma'am," he called gently. The old woman stopped, but did not turn around immediately. Life had taught her caution. Slowly, she faced him, her eyes alert yet tired. Yes, she asked. Jonathan swallowed. Up close, he could see the details others had ignored. The cracked skin on her hands, the faint scar near her eyebrow, the dignity that poverty had failed to erase. "I'm sorry for what happened inside," he said sincerely. "It was wrong." She studied his face, as if searching for mockery, but found none. "You don't need to apologize," she replied. "You didn't throw me out." "No," he said softly, "but I own the place. That makes it my responsibility." Her eyes widened slightly, though she quickly masked her reaction. "Then you should make sure your people remember how to treat human beings," she said calmly. Jonathan nodded. "I will. But first, have you eaten today?" The question was simple, but it carried no judgment. That alone almost broke her composure. "Not really," she admitted, "but I'll manage." He gestured toward the restaurant. "Please come back inside. As my guest." A flicker of pain crossed her face. "I don't want to cause trouble," she said. "I've already had enough attention for one night." "You won't," he assured her. "And if anyone has a problem with it, they'll answer to me." She hesitated, pride wrestling with hunger. Finally, she shook her head. "I appreciate the offer," she said, "but I don't need luxury. Just food." Jonathan exhaled slowly. "Then let me take you somewhere else," he said. "Somewhere quieter." After a long pause, she nodded. They walked together down the street until they reached a small, modest diner glowing softly under a flickering sign. Inside, the smell was simple but comforting: soup, bread, coffee. Jonathan held the door open for her, and she stepped in cautiously, as if expecting rejection to follow her wherever she went. They sat in a corner booth. The waitress approached, smiling warmly. "What can I get you?" she asked. "Whatever she wants," Jonathan said. The old woman glanced at the menu but barely looked at the prices. "Just soup and bread," she said. "That's enough." When the food arrived, she waited, hands folded, until Jonathan nodded gently. Then she ate slowly, savoring each bite as though it were a gift. Jonathan watched in silence, his chest tightening. He recognized that look, the way someone eats when they don't know when they'll eat again. "You spoke about hunger like someone who knows it well," he said quietly. She paused, spoon hovering midair. "Hunger leaves marks," she replied. "Not all of them are visible." Jonathan leaned back slightly. "May I ask your name?" She hesitated. "Margaret," she said finally. "Margaret," he repeated. "There was something you said inside about stealing." She nodded. "I was raised to believe that dignity is the one thing no one can take from you unless you give it away." Jonathan's throat tightened.
"Who taught you that?"
For the first time, her eyes drifted away. "My husband," she said. Before everything fell apart, silence settled between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. "I used to have a life," she continued softly. "A home. A family. I worked hard, paid my bills, believed that if you were kind and honest, the world would meet you halfway." "And?" Jonathan asked. "And the world taught me otherwise," she said with a faint, sad smile. Jonathan felt something shift inside him. Her words mirrored his own past more closely than she could know. As she finished her soup, strength slowly returned to her face. Color crept back into her cheeks. She wiped her mouth carefully, as if determined not to waste a single crumb. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes," Jonathan replied quietly, "I did." Because now he was certain of one thing. Margaret was not just another hungry old woman. She was a living reminder of something he had once been, and something his world had forgotten. Margaret sat quietly in the diner booth, her hands wrapped around the warm cup of tea the waitress had brought without being asked. The steam rose gently, fogging the space between her and Jonathan for a moment, as if giving her time to decide how much of herself she was willing to reveal. Outside, the evening traffic passed in slow waves, headlights flashing like distant stars. Jonathan broke the silence carefully. "You said everything fell apart," he said. "I won't pry if you don't want to talk about it." Margaret looked at him for a long moment. There was no fear in her eyes now, only caution born of disappointment. "People always say that," she replied softly. "Most of them mean it until the story becomes uncomfortable." "I can listen," Jonathan said, without judging. She gave a small nod. "Then I'll tell you a little." She set the cup down, her fingers trembling slightly. Not from weakness, but from memory. "I wasn't always poor," she began. "I worked as a school librarian for nearly 30 years. I loved books. I loved watching children discover words for the first time, seeing their eyes light up when a story carried them somewhere better than where they were." Jonathan smiled faintly. "That sounds like you." Margaret continued. "My husband, Thomas, was a carpenter. Honest work. Strong hands. He believed that building something with care mattered, even if no one ever praised it." She paused, her voice lowering. "We had one son, Daniel." Jonathan leaned forward slightly. "Daniel was bright," she said, a fragile warmth entering her voice. "Too bright sometimes. Always asking questions. Always dreaming bigger than our little town." Her smile faded. "When he was 20, he left for the city. Promised he'd come back once he made something of himself." She exhaled slowly. "He never did." Jonathan waited, sensing the weight behind the words. "Thomas fell sick a few years later," Margaret went on. "Medical bills drained everything. Savings. Insurance. Even the house." Her jaw tightened. "I sold my wedding ring to pay for his medication. It didn't save him." Jonathan's chest tightened. He knew loss, but hearing it spoken so plainly made it heavier. "When Thomas died, I lost more than my husband," she said. "I lost my anchor." She looked down at her hands. "The bank took the house. I was too old to be rehired anywhere decent. The library closed after budget cuts." "And your son?" Jonathan asked gently. Margaret shook her head. "I tried to find him. Letters came back unanswered. Numbers changed. Eventually, I stopped." Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. A mother learns when her hope becomes a burden. Jonathan felt a strange ache behind his eyes. The pieces were coming together, and yet one detail lingered in his mind. "You carry yourself differently," he said, "even after everything." Margaret looked up at him. "Because bitterness is heavy," she replied. "Heavier than hunger. I couldn't carry both." Jonathan fell silent. Her words struck something deep inside him, something he had buried under decades of success. He hesitated, then spoke. "When I was a boy," he said, "my mother used to go hungry so I could eat." Margaret's eyes widened slightly. "She cleaned offices at night," Jonathan continued. "Wore the same coat for years. People looked through her like she didn't exist." His voice tightened. "She once asked a bakery for day-old bread. They laughed at her. I watched it happen." Margaret's lips parted softly. "I'm sorry," she said. "I promised myself," Jonathan said quietly, "that if I ever had power, no one would be made to feel that way in my presence." He laughed bitterly under his breath. "And tonight, in my own restaurant, it happened anyway." Margaret reached across the table and gently placed her hand over his. Her touch was light, but grounding. "Power doesn't come from owning places," she said. "It comes from noticing people." Jonathan nodded, swallowing hard. They left the diner together a short while later. Jonathan insisted on giving her a ride, and this time, she didn't refuse. His car was simple but elegant, humming softly as it moved through the streets. Margaret watched the city pass by, her reflection faint in the window. "Where do you stay?" he asked. "Wherever there's space," she replied. "Shelters when I can. Parks when I can't." Jonathan's grip tightened on the steering wheel. When they stopped near a small public park, Margaret prepared to step out.
"This is fine," she said.
"Thank you for the meal. You've already done more than enough." Jonathan turned to her. "Would you come back to the restaurant tomorrow?" he asked suddenly. She frowned slightly. "Why would I do that?" "Because," he said carefully, "I want you there when something important happens." Margaret studied him. "I don't want revenge," she said. "Neither do I," Jonathan replied. "I want understanding." After a moment, she nodded. "All right," she said. "I'll come." As she stepped out of the car, Jonathan watched her walk toward the dimly lit park bench where she planned to rest for the night. A sense of urgency settled in his chest. Because now he knew Margaret's suffering was not just a story of loss. It was a mirror reflecting a world that had forgotten how to look back. And tomorrow, that mirror would be held up for everyone to see. Morning arrived quietly, wrapped in pale sunlight and cool air. Margaret woke on the park bench with a stiffness that reminded her of her age, yet there was something different in her chest that day. Not hope exactly, but curiosity. She washed her face at a public restroom, smoothed her gray hair with her fingers, and adjusted her worn coat. She had kept her word. Whatever Jonathan intended, she would see it through. Across town, the luxury restaurant buzzed with unusual tension. Jonathan stood in his private office upstairs, staring through the glass wall that overlooked the dining floor. Managers, supervisors, and senior staff stood in front of his desk, uneasy. None of them knew why they had been summoned so early, but the seriousness on Jonathan's face told them this was no routine meeting. "I want everyone here by noon," Jonathan said calmly. "No exceptions." One manager cleared his throat. "Is something wrong, sir?" Jonathan met his eyes. "Very wrong." By midday, the restaurant was full again. Wealthy patrons, polished tables, soft music. The same waiter from the night before moved between tables, unaware that his world was about to shift. At precisely 12:30, the glass doors opened. Margaret stepped inside. A hush rippled through the room like a sudden change in air pressure. Whispers began instantly. "It's her again. Why is she back? Doesn't she have any shame?" The waiter noticed her and groaned quietly. "Not again," he muttered, already moving toward her with irritation flashing across his face. Before he could reach her, Jonathan appeared beside Margaret. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Welcome," he said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "I'm glad you came." Confusion spread across faces. The waiter froze mid-step. Jonathan guided Margaret toward the center of the restaurant. Chairs scraped softly as people turned to watch. Some customers looked amused. Others looked uncomfortable. Jonathan stopped and faced the room. "Last night," he said evenly, "an old woman entered this restaurant asking for leftover food." Margaret lowered her eyes, her hands folded calmly. "She was humiliated," Jonathan continued.
"Mocked."
"Treated as if her hunger made her less human." A few people shifted in their seats. "That woman," Jonathan said, his voice growing stronger, "is my guest today." Gasps followed. The waiter's face drained of color. "Sir, Jonathan raised a hand. "You'll speak later." He turned back to the customers. "Many of you laughed. Some of you looked away. A few of you justified it by telling yourselves she deserved it." His gaze moved slowly across the room. No one met his eyes. "Let me tell you something," Jonathan said. "This restaurant exists because of people like her." Silence fell. "I grew up watching my mother starve so I could eat," he went on. "She was humiliated the same way. And I promised myself that no human being would ever be treated that way in a place that carried my name. He gestured toward Margaret. She did not steal. She did not beg loudly. She asked with dignity. Margaret finally looked up. Her eyes were steady. Jonathan turned toward the staff. Every employee here represents me, and last night you failed. The waiter trembled. Sir, I was just following rules. No, Jonathan said firmly. You were following cruelty. He paused, then delivered words that felt like thunder. Effective immediately, you're dismissed. The waiter's mouth fell open. Security stepped forward, not toward Margaret this time, but toward him. Jonathan addressed the room once more. But this isn't just about punishment. It's about accountability. He snapped his fingers. A manager brought forward a small envelope and handed it to Margaret. This restaurant will partner with shelters across the city, Jonathan announced. Leftover food will be donated daily. No one who asks respectfully will ever be turned away again. Margaret's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside was a letter and a check. Her breath caught. This is not charity, Jonathan said softly, looking at her. It's restitution. And an offer. She looked up, stunned. An offer? I want you to work with us, he said. Not as a symbol, but as a voice. To train staff. To remind us who we're serving. Tears finally slipped down Margaret's cheeks, silent and unashamed. The room stood still. In that moment, the tables had turned. The humiliated woman was standing tall. And those who had mocked her now felt the weight of her quiet strength. Margaret stood in the center of the restaurant, the envelope still clutched in her trembling hands. The room felt different now. The same walls, the same tables, the same people, but the air itself had shifted. Where there had once been arrogance, there was discomfort. Where there had been laughter, there was silence. She took a slow breath and looked around. Faces that had mocked her the night before now avoided her gaze. Some looked ashamed. Others looked stunned, as if the world they trusted had cracked open in front of them. I didn't come here today for this, Margaret said quietly. Her voice was soft, yet every word carried. I didn't come for money, or revenge, or apologies, she continued. I came because I was hungry. And because I believed that somewhere someone might still remember what kindness looks like. Jonathan watched her closely, saying nothing. This was her moment. When you are hungry long enough, Margaret went on, you stop asking why people are cruel. You start asking how they learn to forget. She glanced toward the tables. Last night, many of you forgot. A woman near the front lowered her head. Margaret's fingers tightened around the envelope. I accept this offer, she said, turning slightly toward Jonathan. Not because I need it, but because it might help someone else who does. Jonathan nodded, emotion flickering across his face. Over the following weeks, the restaurant changed in ways no one expected. Margaret was given clean clothes, a small apartment, and a steady income, but she never lost her humility. She arrived early each day, greeting staff with warmth, learning names, listening to stories. She spoke during training sessions, not with lectures, but with lived truth. Hunger doesn't shout at first, she would tell them. It whispers. And by the time it screams, it's already too late. Leftover food was packed carefully each night and delivered to shelters. A simple sign was placed near the entrance. No one leaves hungry. Customers noticed. Some scoffed at first, but many stayed. Some even began to help. One afternoon, Jonathan found Margaret sitting alone after closing, staring at a photograph she kept in her coat pocket. Is that your husband? He asked gently. She smiled sadly. And my son. Jonathan's heart skipped. Your son? Yes, she said. Daniel. Jonathan felt the ground shift beneath him. The name echoed too closely with his own memories. His breath caught. "Margaret," he said slowly. "What was your son's last name?" She looked up.
Hale.
Time seemed to stop. Jonathan sank into the chair across from her, his face pale. "My name is Jonathan Hale," he whispered. Margaret stared at him, her eyes widening in disbelief. "No," she breathed. "My Daniel would be about my age," Jonathan finished, his voice shaking. "My mother was a librarian. My father was a carpenter." The photograph slipped from Margaret's hands. Tears streamed freely now as years of silence collapsed into truth. Mother and son, separated by poverty, pride, and time, were reunited in the most unlikely way. They held each other and cried, not for what was lost, but for what had been found. News of the story spread quickly. People talked about karma, about justice, about miracles. But Margaret knew the truth. There was no miracle, she said once. Only a choice to see or to ignore. The restaurant became a symbol, not of wealth but of humanity. And Margaret, once humiliated for asking for leftovers, became the heart that taught everyone watching. Kindness costs nothing. Cruelty costs everything. Sometimes, the greatest lessons don't come from success or wealth. They come from how we treat someone when we think no one is watching. That old woman didn't ask for sympathy. She didn't ask for money. She asked for dignity. And in that moment of cruelty, the world revealed its true face. But so did humanity. If this story touched your heart, remember this. Every person you see is fighting a battle you cannot see. Kindness costs nothing, but it can change everything.
Before you judge, pause.
Before you ignore, look again. Because the person you push away today might be the miracle you need tomorrow. If you believe compassion still matters, like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more stories that remind us what being human truly means. Red Heart.